you've been inside your own head again, running the same scenario over and over and over, trying to find the one angle you haven't thought of yet, the one piece you might have missed. And somewhere in the middle of that spiral, you stop and think, what is wrong with me? People tell you to relax, to stop overthinking, that you're making it harder than it needs to be. And maybe you've even started to believe them. But here's what no one tells you. The thing that makes you spiral, the thing that feels like your greatest weakness, is actually the signature of a specific psychological profile, one that researchers associate with higher empathy, greater problem-solving depth, and something called cognitive flexibility that most people never develop. Overthinkers aren't broken. They're operating at a level most people can't access. Today, we're going to prove it, and more importantly, we're going to show you how to use it. Let's start with what's actually happening in your brain. Psychologists have a name for the way overthinkers process information. It's called rumination. And yes, in its extreme form, it's linked to anxiety and depression. That's the version most people know about. But there's another form. Researchers at UC Santa Barbara call it adaptive self-reflection. Same behavior, completely different outcome. And the difference between the two isn't the thinking itself. It's what the thinking is pointed at. Here's what that means in practice. When an overthinker is stuck in a loop about something they can't control, past mistakes, other people's opinions, worst-case scenarios, it becomes destructive. The thinking has no exit. But when that exact same brain is given a real problem, a decision that matters, a system to figure out, a person to understand, something shifts. The same relentless processing that felt like a prison becomes a superpower. A 2019 study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that people with high introspective tendencies scored significantly higher on measures of creative problem solving, specifically in situations where multiple variables had to be held in mind simultaneously. In other words, the exact thing that makes you exhausting to be around at a dinner party makes you exceptional in a boardroom, in a crisis, in a relationship that requires depth. So why does it feel like a curse? Because the world wasn't built for the way you think. We live in a culture that glorifies fast decisions, quick replies, and confident certainty. The person who answers first in the meeting gets the credit, even if their answer is shallow. The person still processing in the back of the room, running it through every angle, checking for flaws, gets called hesitant, indecisive, a liability. And over time, you start to internalize that. You start to believe the problem is the depth of your processing, not the shallowness of the standard you're being held to. But think about who you actually want in your corner when something goes wrong. You don't want the person who gave you a confident answer in 30 seconds. You want the person who stayed up all night thinking through every possible scenario. The one who spotted the things nobody else caught. The one who's already lived through the worst case in their head. So, when it actually happens, they're not panicking. They're ready. That's the overthinker. Every time, the surgeon who reviewed the case files 6 times before the operation, the engineer who ran the numbers again even after everyone else signed off, the friend who texted you 3 days later with the thing they forgot to say, because they'd been thinking about your situation the entire time. These people aren't anxious. They're thorough. The distinction matters enormously, and most overthinkers have never been given permission to see themselves that way. Until now. Let's get specific about what actually makes overthinkers different. Because it's not just one thing. There are 3 distinct psychological traits that show up again and again in people who process deeply. The first is what psychologists call sensory processing sensitivity. First identified by researcher Dr. Elaine Aron, this trait describes people whose nervous systems are simply tuned to a higher resolution. They pick up on subtleties, in tone, in environment, in emotional undercurrent, that most people miss completely. The downside is overwhelm. The upside is a level of perceptual accuracy that borders on unsettling. The second is cognitive load tolerance. This is the capacity to hold multiple competing ideas in mind at the same time without prematurely collapsing them into a simple answer. Most people experience cognitive discomfort when a situation is ambiguous. Overthinkers sit in that ambiguity longer. And that's where the insight lives. That's where the angles nobody else saw get found. The third is counterfactual thinking. This is the ability to run mental simulations, to imagine how a situation could have gone differently, to stress test a plan before it's executed. It's the trait that makes overthinkers seem pessimistic to the outside world. But internally, what's happening is rigorous scenario planning. They're not imagining failure because they're afraid of it. They're imagining failure so they can prevent it. 3 traits, 1 profile. And here's what it adds up to. You are not someone who thinks too much. You are someone who has never been taught how to aim. So how do you go from someone who overthinks to someone whose thinking is an asset? 3 shifts. These aren't tips. They're reorientations. Shift 1. Replace rumination with interrogation. Rumination circles. Interrogation moves. The next time you find yourself in a loop, ask one question. Is there an action available to me right now? If yes, take it. If no, the loop is consuming fuel you need later. Close it. Not because the thinking doesn't matter, but because thought without agency is just weather in your head. Shift 2. Use your processing as a service, not a sentence. The people in your life, if they're paying attention, already know that you see things others don't. Start leading with that. Offer your analysis before you're asked. Put it in writing. Become the person who sends the message 3 days later with the thing everyone missed. That's not annoying. That's irreplaceable. Shift 3. Own the tempo. Stop apologizing for needing more time to think. Stop performing quick confidence you don't feel. The world is full of fast, shallow answers. It is starving for slow, deep ones. Your tempo is not a weakness you're working around. It's a competitive advantage. In your work, in your relationships, in every room you walk into. The overthinker who's learned to aim their thinking doesn't just survive in a complex world. They're the ones who figure it out. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The world will keep telling you that you think too much, that you need to simplify. That confidence looks like certainty, and depth looks like doubt. Don't believe it. The most important decisions, the ones that actually change lives, are never made by the person who answered fastest. They're made by the person who stayed in the question long enough to find what was actually true. That's you. If this hit something you needed to hear, share it with someone who's been calling themselves an overthinker, like it's a flaw. Because the most powerful thing you can do for someone who thinks like you is show them what that thinking is actually worth. I'll see you in the next one.